Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation for the language assessment course. Today I will evaluate a fifth grade English quiz. Uh, the test is a 30-minute achievement quiz focusing on comparatives and superlatives. The main objects were to assess whether students could recognize these structures, apply correct spelling rules, and understand their meaning in real-world context. In this presentation, I will quickly analyze the test design, examine three graded student papers, and share my reflection. Now let's look at our first student, for example, from class 5E, who scores 72 out of 100. I categorize this as a medium performance level because the students understand the core concepts but struggle with production and specific markers under test conditions. Looking at their strengths, the students did an excellent job in part A and part D. Whenever part part D is here. Mhm. Uh, Whenever options were provided and explicit structural triggers like then were present, they successfully recognized and selected the correct comparative forms such as more expensive, hotter, and more exciting. This shows their recognition, memory for synthetic patterns in quite strong. However, we see a significant drop in performance in part B here where the students lost 12 points. When forced to produce structures without a word bank, they experienced structural confusion with long adjectives and superlatives. For instance, in items 2 and 4, instead of using the required superlative forms, they incorrectly wrote comparative forms like more interest and more difficult. Additionally, in item 3, they mixed up the rules by writing the taller instead of simple comparative. Lastly, in part C, they made a simple semantic error by marking the statements about Mount Everest as false, which might indicate a slight loss of focus or rushing through the reading. In conclusion, this paper shows that while the student can recognize comparative patterns easily, they need more targeted practice on non-anchored production tasks, focusing specifically on the structural differences between short and long adjectives in superlatives. Now let's move on to our second student sample to analyze the different performance. Moving on to our second student sample, this paper belongs to a anonymized student from class 5E. I can't read the name. Uh, who scored a 54 out of 100. I classify this as a low medium performance level because the students demonstrate a severe gap between structured recognition tasks and active language production. Let's start with their absolute strengths. On the second page, the student achieved an incredibly result by getting full marks in part C, true, false, and losing only 2 points in part D. In part D, they missed only item 3 by circling hottest instead of hotter. This exceptional performance in part C and D shows that when options are explicitly laid out or when they are mapping semantic meaning against word facts, their recognition capacity is perfectly fine. However, their structural mastery completely collapses when moving to independent tasks. In part A, multiple choice, they lost 24 points, showing a major confusion between short and long adjective rules, often incorrectly choosing non-existent forms like more fast or more cold. The most evident diagnostic proof is in part B, where the student scored 0 out of 20. They struggled heavily with baseline mechanics. They wrote more cold, more tall, and more wide, completely ignoring the short adjective suffix rules. Furthermore, they entirely dropped the superlative structures for items 2 and 4, leaving the base form of turning them into failure structures. And for the last paper, The John scored 89 out of 100. The student's absolute mastery is visible in parts A and parts D, where they score full marks. They successfully handled complex structural cues on the first page, correctly choosing the highest for global context and better for direct comparison. On the second page, in part D, they systematically picked all the correct comparative and superlative modifiers without a single error. However, even high-performing students face predictable challenges under test conditions. Let's analyze where they lost points. Part B, the students lost points here due to a mix of rule or generalization and spelling errors. In item 2, instead of writing more distance spelling, they wrote more interest. Uh, In item 5, they applied a long adjective rule to a short adjective by writing more wide instead of wider. Interestingly, they perfectly executed more difficult in item 4, showing they do know the rule but occasionally mix up its application. Part C, the students missed two items here, marking item 7 as false and item 10 is false as well. While alt item 10 is actually false, the grader marked it wrong, showing a potential misunderstanding of the prompt intent or simply carelessness during the reading process. In conclusion, an 89 indicates an excellent grasp of the core curriculum. For a higher achiever like this, future interaction should move away from fill in the blanks and focus instead of creativity, pre-production writing text to fully solidify their command of short versus long adjective mechanics. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.